Okay, so welcome to our second Research to Practice webinar of the 2022 series. Today we will hear from Ben Dantzer on co-constructing knowledge with youth, how high school aged mentors support their mentees' autonomy, belonging, and competence. So before we begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. Acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous lands. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this land. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. And I'm joining you today from Treaty 13 territory in Toronto, but I know that we have people joining us from all across Canada. If you want to tell us where you're coming from and what treaty or unceded lands you're coming from, please feel free to use the chat for that purpose. So this webinar series is brought to you by Mentor Canada, but also by the Canadian Centre for Mentoring Research, recognizing that translating research into practice is an essential component in how we improve mentoring for the young people we're serving across Canada. So really, our goal is to showcase innovative research and program practices that could be of interest for programs and mentoring sector stakeholders across the country. And I'm pleased to be able to bring this series whenever possible to practitioners across the country. We had a previous webinar in February for mentoring youth with mental health needs with Martha McCormack from Portland State University. That recording is available on our website and on our YouTube channel if you are interested. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Ben Dantzer, who's a PhD candidate in human development, learning, and culture at the University of British Columbia. His research investigates the impact of mentoring relationships on human development and explores an innovative mentoring model that has been labeled as youth-initiated mentoring. His research uses a participatory approach that invites youth to act as co-researchers throughout the entire research process. This participatory approach recognizes that youth are experts in their own lives and invites them to co-construct knowledge alongside researchers. The participatory approach to research is unique in the field of mentoring and seeks to contribute to a more culturally sensitive and locally informed study and add to our existing body of knowledge. So without more delay, I know Ben has an interesting project to report on today, some work that he and other researchers have undertaken over the last years or so, and pleased to showcase some Canadian research. There's not, comparatively speaking, there's a lot more that gets produced in the US, so whenever we can find something from Canada, we're very pleased to be able to bring it and showcase it. So Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Veronique. That was a very warm welcome. I realize my bio is a bit long. I need to cut that down for future presentations. Hi, everyone. As Veronique was saying earlier, I really do want to treat this a bit informally in the sense that at any point, if you have questions, please unmute your mic and interrupt me or raise your hand, and Veronique will let me know that you have a question. But I do prefer that style. So if there's a slide that you want to ask questions, please do. So this presentation is really about an article that I had published recently, which was titled Co-Constructing Knowledge with Youth: What High School Age Mentors Say and Do to Support Their Mentees' Autonomy, Belonging, and Competence. And before I begin, I wanted to provide a land acknowledgement and say that I'm currently living and learning on the territories of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and the Attawandaron peoples. And I also wanted to personalize my land acknowledgement a little bit and discuss kind of what I'm reading to learn more about reconciliation and also what I'm doing to help further reconciliation. So two books that I found helpful are Five Little Indians by Michelle Good and The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. If you haven't heard of them or read them, I highly suggest checking them out. I found them very historically kind of illuminating and powerful stories. And then in terms of what I'm actually doing to support reconciliation, just in my own small way, I'm starting to challenge inappropriate jokes. So there was a recent study in my community, which is London, Ontario, on racism and discrimination. And the study found that the most common form of racism and discrimination, particularly among Indigenous peoples, was inappropriate jokes. So when those opportunities arise, I'm making a committed effort to challenge those. So an introduction to the paper and the purpose of the broader study. So this was a cross-age peer mentoring program. For those of you who don't know, cross-age peer mentoring is basically just like peer mentoring, except the mentors are typically high school students who are 2 or more years older than the mentees. And the mentees are usually elementary students, but there is some variation. There's recently been a meta-analysis on cross-age peer mentoring, the first one conducted, and it revealed a medium-sized effect size. So this is a bit exciting because for those of you who might not be aware, the meta-analyses to date on formal peer mentoring programs or just formal mentoring programs are usually 0.18, and they can range to 0.21. So it seems at least that cross-age peer mentoring seems to be a more potent form of mentoring for peers. So despite this kind of knowledge and a lot of research on cross-age peer mentoring, there still are kind of calls and recommendations in the research literature to continue investigating and kind of surfacing the ingredients or essential elements of high quality relationships. So what contributes to these high quality relationships, which will then contribute to the positive outcomes? And that was really the focus of my study. So in response to that call, 2 research studies had looked at relationships motivation theory, or RMT. And in these 2 studies, they looked at how RMT could help college students or teachers develop high quality relationships with their mentees. So relationships motivation theory, at its most basic foundations, is this idea that relationships they thrive, they're high quality when there's experiences of autonomy, belonging, or competence within that relationship. Those are the 3 core ingredients of positive, healthy, and supportive relationships, according to relationships motivation theory. So a sense of autonomy is really generally defined as a sense of control over our thoughts and actions within a relationship. And research has found that these feelings of autonomy can be encouraged when people are offered flexible and meaningful choices, invited to participate in the decision-making process, and have their perspectives acknowledged within the relationship. A sense of belonging is generally defined as feelings of acceptance and connection with others. And there's also a feeling that you're a really important or integral part of the relationship. And research has found that sense of belonging can be supported through demonstrations of caring involvement and showing an interest in the other person, and also offering opportunities for that person to feel connected within the relationship, and also disclosing personal information about yourself to kind of build rapport. Finally, a sense of competence is kind of feeling effective in our current skills within a relationship, but also opportunities to develop and expand ourselves and our skills and demonstrate that expansion of our skills within a relationship. And as I mentioned earlier, the 2 existing studies who have used RMT, so what that means is basically they invited the mentors, which again were college students or teachers, to learn about relationships motivation theory kind of during training sessions. and then go out into their mentoring sessions and actively support feelings of autonomy, belonging, and competence within those relationships. And at the end of the day, what those two studies found was that higher supports of autonomy, belonging, and competence, so mentors who were kind of more effective at doing this, produced higher quality relationships as reported by the mentees. So that brings me to the current paper and research study. And there were basically three broad goals of this paper and study. The first was to demonstrate the capacity of high school age mentors. So cross-age peer mentoring is really designed for high school age mentors and elementary school age mentees. So I really wanted to demonstrate that RMT could be applied with high school mentors. So they had the capacity of learning about this theory and then going out and supporting feelings of autonomy, belonging, and competence. And this was important because, as I mentioned, the previous studies were using college students or teachers. So I really wanted to focus it on that age group. And I also wanted to capture what the mentors say and do during mentoring sessions. So this was another limitation of the previous studies. They didn't actually monitor how the mentors went about supporting feelings of autonomy, belonging, and competence. So I really wanted to capture, kind of using audio recorders, I wanted to capture what occurred during the mentoring sessions and what strategies worked and what strategies did not work. And then finally, I wanted to explore the impact on the relationship. So does supporting a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence produce high quality relationships? So moving on to the mentoring context and research design. The context was an after-school music program in Western Canada. So this program offered free music education to the children and youth living in the community. And there was a heavy emphasis on classical music, learning to play classical instruments, but there was also alternative genres offered if necessary. There was also a free kind of snack program offered there, and also musical therapy. So the research design, I used a multiple case study design. So there was 5 mentoring relationships. So 5 mentors aged 14 to 18 years of age with an average age of 15. 5 mentees ranging in age from 8 to 12 and an average age of 9. And all mentors and mentees were female. I collected data using audio recordings of mentoring sessions. So again, capturing what they say and do. Weekly mentoring logs. So this was my way of inviting the mentors to report kind of during that session, what strategies did they use to support a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence? And then we would use that for some ongoing support. And also the mentors and mentees rated the quality of their interaction that week, so we could track the quality of the relationships over time. There were 10 mentoring sessions. And then I conducted individual interviews at the end of the program with all participants. And for those interested in the more nitty-gritty aspects of research, I used in vivo coding, provisional coding, and descriptive statistics to analyze the data. So the program timeline, so before, during, and after the mentoring sessions is how I'll present it. Before, we had the mentor skill building sessions. And this is based on best practices of providing kind of pre-match training to all mentors. So we held 2 one-hour skill building sessions with all of the mentors to, again, develop their capabilities to support a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence. And I'll discuss those in more detail in the next few slides. So we had those sessions, and then we had a group hangout. So the mentors and mentees, we went to a pizza and board game restaurant, and it was basically just a socialization opportunity. During the program, so again, there was 10 mentoring sessions across 3 months. The first 5 mentoring sessions, there was a developmental focus. So what that means is basically, this was the first time that the mentees were even picking up their instruments. So they were learning the violin, the cello, and the guitar. So the first 5 sessions was really focused on learning simple chords, notes, and rhythms, and really developing that rapport and kind of sense of friendship. That's what the mentors were kind of invited to do. In the second half, so mentoring sessions 5 through 10, there was a more instrumental focus. So what that means is basically the mentors were invited to now teach their mentees kind of a more structured and limited rhythm, which would then be synchronized across the 5 mentoring relationships into a cohesive song. So during mentoring sessions 5 through 10, there was a bit more structure and guidance introduced to the relationship. And then interspersed throughout these 10 mentoring sessions, we had mentor support meetings, which I'll also explain further, but basically this was an opportunity, and it's also a best practice recommended in the literature, for the mentors to gather kind of as a learning community and discuss kind of what's going well, what's not going well, and kind of brainstorm together and get ideas from one another about really good strategies for supporting autonomy, belonging, and competence. After the mentoring sessions, there was a spring recital at the after-school music program. So the song that they created as a mentoring group, they performed it for their friends and community. And then we had a final group hangout as kind of a final celebration of their relationships. So we went to a botanical gardens and a high ropes course. So diving deeper into the skill building sessions. So as I said, there was 2 one-hour skill building sessions. In the first session, our goals were to really introduce the concept of mentoring, identify healthy mentoring behaviors, and clarify the goals and expectations for the mentors. So a bit more of an administrative session, but nonetheless important. So to achieve these goals, we engaged in a few activities. The first was a "Who is my mentor" activity that I developed. And basically it was a worksheet that invited each of the mentors independently to think about a mentor in their life currently, or one that they've had in the past, describe who they were, what they did for them, how they made them feel, and 3 words to describe them. So I filled it out first, and I talked about a baseball coach that I had, and then I read my responses to the group. After we did that, each of the mentors independently kind of explained their answers to that worksheet. After that group conversation, we used our responses to fill out the next worksheet, which was basically, what is a mentor worksheet? And this was basically a worksheet with a few prompts. And the prompts were: a mentor is ... a mentor is not ... a mentor provides, and a mentor does not provide. So using the high school mentors' lived experiences and real relationships, we identified some of the positive characteristics of mentors, what they say, what they do, and we wrote them down. And then we did the rest of the questions. So a mentor is not, a mentor provides, a mentor does not provide. And this was a way, again, to identify healthy mentoring behaviors and contextualize it, make it real for the mentors, right? Because it's from their real experiences. And then finally, to clarify the goals and expectations, I provided a program overview handout, which was basically just describing the structure of the program, and then a mentor contract. So they all signed a mentor contract, which basically outlined their responsibilities, expected frequency of contact, things of that nature. The next skill building session was really when we dove into the nitty-gritty of relationships motivation theory. So to begin, or our goals rather, were to introduce the core concepts of RMT and to build the capacity to support these feelings of autonomy, belonging, and competence. To do so, we engaged in 2 activities. We co-constructed our own definitions of autonomy, belonging, and competence, so not relying on the kind of stuffy academic definitions, but actually using the mentor's own age-related vocabulary so that they really understood these concepts. And then we engaged in 3 role-playing scenarios where they actually had opportunities to practice supporting feelings of autonomy, belonging, and competence. So the definition activity was basically they were each given a worksheet with autonomy is, belonging is, competence is, and they were sent off and invited to create their own definitions from their own understandings. After they did that, we came back, had a broader group discussion. Each of them shared their definitions. And as they were sharing, I wrote some of the common elements on a whiteboard for us all to see. After that, we came together and co-constructed a communal definition for autonomy, belonging, and competence. And what we came up with was autonomy is when someone feels self-reliant and independent. Belonging is when someone feels welcomed, loved, and accepted. And competence is when someone feels effective and that they understand what they are doing. So after co-constructing this definition, I really wanted to invite the mentors to kind of have a deeper discussion about autonomy, because, you know, a sense of autonomy doesn't necessarily reflect independence. And this was important to discuss because the whole nature of the program was for the mentors to collaborate interdependently with their mentees. So we had a conversation about, you know, autonomy is not independence and things of that nature, and kind of revisited that definition. And then we came up with what autonomy is when someone feels acknowledged and in control of what they do and learn. So with our definitions in hand, the next activity was to practice supporting these feelings from our definitions. So the mentors were given the prompt: while making music with your mentee, how do you think you could support their autonomy, belonging / competence? What could you say or do? And this was, again, a worksheet that they did independently. We came together and brainstormed kind of the common elements. So the 3 role-playing scenarios that they were kind of invited to explore were the agreeable mentee. So in this scenario, this mentee was extremely agreeable, agreeing with everything that the mentor suggested, really having difficulty voicing their own opinion, and kind of having a sense of autonomy. So the mentors were tasked with, how would you go about, what would you say or do in this situation to kind of support their sense of autonomy and invite them to start, you know, voicing their own opinions, making their own decisions, making their own choices, things of that nature. The second scenario was the lonely mentee. So this was supporting a sense of belonging. In this scenario, the mentee had been just bullied at school quite harshly right before the mentoring session. And they were kind of sharing that with their mentor. So in this scenario, the mentors had to, using their definition, come up with things that they could say or do to support a sense of belonging and kind of deeper their connection with their mentee and kind of create a safe space for them. And then finally, the discouraged mentee. This was a competence scenario. So in this scenario, the mentee, although the mentor had noticed that they were making great progress and really advancing in their understanding of their instrument, the mentee was just discouraged. They weren't seeing that progress. They were kind of dejected and amotivated during this mentoring session. So again, the mentees or the mentors were tasked with, okay, so what can I say or do in this situation to strengthen their sense of competence and their kind of idea that they're, you know, a developing musician, and this is going to take time. So after they answered each of those scenarios individually, we again came together as a group and kind of identified some of the strategies that we really liked and wanted to use in our mentoring program. So these skill building sessions culminated in the creation of the ABC companion, so the autonomy, belonging, and competence companion. And on the right, this is what it looked like. So this was a worksheet that was kind of printed off and laminated and given to each of the mentors. So again, they could bring this into their mentoring sessions and use it as kind of a real-time support for situations where they noticed that their mentee was struggling to make choices. So they could look at some of the consider doing things like, or consider saying things like. So basically, yeah, it provides the definitions that we created as a group for autonomy, belonging, and competence. And then the consider doing things like is all the strategies that we co-constructed as a group. So for autonomy, they could try providing meaningful choices or acknowledging your mentee's perspective. And to enact that, they could consider saying things like, you always have a lot of good ideas. What do you think we should do? Or I am curious about what you think about this. So again, these are all the strategies that we co-constructed as a group using the high school mentors' vocabularies and lived experiences. So again, it wasn't based off stuffy research definitions and strategies. It was strategies that they came up with on their own. So a little bit more, so mentoring sessions 1 through 5, as I mentioned, they were learning simple rhythms together. And the primary focus was on relationship development. And the mentoring sessions were 1 hour each. Interspersed throughout these mentoring sessions, we had the mentor support meetings. So this was basically after a meeting, we came together as a group for like, I think 15 to 30 minutes, and we just had a group conversation. And we had a template to facilitate this process. And it was a 4-quadrant template that kind of walked us through this ongoing kind of support process. In the top left quadrant, they were asked, what did you try? Which strategies or go-to statements did you try with your mentee in the past few meetings? So again, after each session, the mentors had been completing their weekly logs. And in those logs, in addition to rating the quality of their relationship, they were invited to describe what they did that session to support a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence, and kind of describe how that went. So in this top left corner, they're basically just reviewing their weekly logs and point form jotting down what they did. They're then invited to report how did it go. So which strategies or go-to statements worked well and which ones didn't, and then worked well, didn't work well. Again, they're kind of, this is an internal self-reflection process, and they're jotting these down. At this point, we have a group conversation about it. So each mentor goes around and reports out what they tried and what worked well and what didn't work well. So again, an opportunity for ongoing learning from each other about the strategies that were working in their relationship. So one mentor might say, oh, I'm going to try that in mine, or okay, I'll avoid that strategy in the next mentoring session. After we had that conversation, they were each individually invited to reflect on what did you learn. So what did you learn about your mentee, about supporting the ABCs? And then they were invited to report, what will you try? So based on today's group conversation, what strategies or go-to statements are you going to try in your next meeting with your mentee? And then we would engage in this process kind of cyclically as the mentoring program progressed. Mentoring sessions 5 through 10, as I said, there was more of an instrumental focus. So the mentors were teaching their mentees specific rhythms. So there was more structure introduced into the relationship. The rhythms were synchronized into a song. We had a local music recording service come in and professionally record the song, which everyone was understandably super excited for. So we had that professionally recorded and put onto a CD. And then the mentees created the album art for it. And then they each got a physical CD. So that was very exciting for them and me, if I'm being honest. And then there was a spring concert. So we performed the song for the community. And then we had our final hangout at the High Ropes course and the botanical gardens. So before I jump into the results, I just wanted to reiterate the research goals. So I wanted to demonstrate the capacity of high school aged mentors to engage with the concepts of RMT, capture what they actually say and do during the mentoring sessions to support a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence, and then explore the impact on the relationships. So in terms of the capacity of the high school mentors, results really demonstrate that they were capable of learning about RMT and developing the necessary skills to support autonomy, belonging, and competence. And evidence for this was gathered during the skill building sessions. So they were able to engage in our co-construction of definitions. They really understood those concepts, were able and willing and motivated to kind of define them in their own words, They were able to apply their definitions and create their own strategies and statements for supporting these feelings within their mentees. And again, the culmination of that was the creation of the ABC Companion, which was basically co-constructed by them as a group, their definitions and their strategies. In terms of what did mentors say and do, again, this was captured from the audio recordings of the mentoring session. So I placed it between one dyad kind of each session. And the results demonstrate that mentors successfully use language and strategies associated with autonomy, belonging, and competence satisfaction. And this was a table from the actual paper, and it's basically showing what strategies were used in the order of consistency. So some were used by mentors in every session, and some were used a little bit less frequently. So the most consistent was the mentors gave encouraging feedback. So this was a sense of competence support. And to do that, they would say things like, okay, that was really good, good job, things of that nature. Very kind of broad, encouraging feedback. The second most consistent strategy was the mentors involved their mentee in the decision-making process. So this is a form rather of autonomy support. And an example is a mentor saying to their mentee, so how many times do you think we should do it for the D string and the A string? And the mentee saying, 4 for the D string, and then for the A string, 2 times. And then the mentor saying, okay, great. So really inviting the mentee to make meaningful decisions about the structure of their song. The mentors also supported a sense of belonging by demonstrating a personal interest. And this was very basic things like saying, how was your day? What did you do for spring break? What's your favorite season? So expressing an interest and willingness to learn about their mentee. They also gave effort-focused feedback, so a form of competence support. And an example of this is mentors saying things like, have you been practicing? You're doing so good. It sounds like you have been practicing all the time. Or you just worked really hard, so you should be proud. So it's effort-focused feedback because it's connecting successful outcomes with effort and practice. And for those who know about Carol Dweck's work, this is a very potent form of motivational messaging, and it can be quite enduring. It's kind of that growth mindset mentality. The mentors also acknowledge their mentees' perspective, so a sense of autonomy support. So saying things like, you think you mastered that, you think you got it, you feeling good, any questions, need any help? They provided choices. They made personal disclosures, so supporting a sense of belonging by telling their mentees about themselves, kind of both in a general sense, but also more deeply and kind of more vulnerable aspects of themselves. They accepted mistakes, so a sense of competence support by saying things like, don't worry about the funky notes, I play them too, so don't worry about it. So kind of minimalizing mistakes and showing that competence and is kind of built over time through effort and growth. And then they finally provided rationales for their decisions, a sense of autonomy support. An example for this would be, today I'm going to tune your instrument for you because we don't have a lot of time. So usually the mentees would be tuning their own instruments. This mentor said, we don't have enough time right now. I usually want to support your autonomy, but I have to provide this kind of rationale for my decision. We don't have a lot of time. I'm going to tune it today. So what did I learn kind of from that finding about what the mentor said and did? So for autonomy, kind of the general finding was that the mentors found they had a difficulty balancing autonomy support with structure. So in mentoring sessions 5 through 10, when there was more of an instrumental and structured approach, the mentors found it really difficult. They found it difficult to continue providing the amount of autonomy that they were providing in the first 5 sessions when it was kind of open-ended during those 5 through 10 sessions, and they really struggled. For belonging, the general finding was there was difficulty establishing early rapport. So during the first few mentoring sessions, the mentors reported that they were really kind of struggling to establish a deep sense of connection with their mentees. But what we found through the mentor support meetings was that demonstrating a personal interest was a really successful strategy. So they all found that as soon as they started asking about their days, asking about their time at school, what they did over spring break, the connection just flipped and it became much deeper and more kind of nuanced. For competence, the general finding that the mentors reported this as the easiest to support. They found that this was the easiest concept to understand and then go out and support. Despite this finding, the mentors could have been supported more successfully by myself to provide more effort-focused feedback. So they were providing a lot of general kind of encouraging feedback, but as I mentioned earlier, a more kind of enduring and potent form of competence support is effort-focused feedback, so that growth mindset mentality. Finally, the impact on the relationship. So in their weekly logs, across all 10 mentoring sessions, the mentors and mentees were asked, how happy are you with the way things went today between you and your mentor/mentee? So on a 5-point scale, the average for the mentors was 3.65 and the mentees was 4.52. So clearly strong, high quality relationships. And the finding that the mentor average is lower than the mentees is consistent with previous research. Mentors usually tend to report lower overall feelings of quality than the mentees do. And also 4 out of the 5 mentors reported that learning about RMT helped them develop and maintain positive relationships. And their interviews really kind of help bring this to life. So in their interviews, one of the questions was asking them about the skill building sessions and basically about relationships, motivation theory, learning about autonomy, belonging, and competence, and how they found that. Did they find it useful? One mentor said, I thought it was really neat because when I babysit or hang out with younger kids, I never really thought about like competence and belonging and autonomy. I kind of just did it, but without really thinking about it very much. So it was cool having to think more about it and then knowing and learning how effective it is with the kids. You don't really think much about how special and important that is for someone. And then another mentor said, I found it helpful for mentors to prepare ourselves. I think that all 3 of them are very important, referring to autonomy, belonging, and competence. I learned to be more aware when I talk to younger kids. Don't just talk to them, but ask their opinions and try to put a sense of belonging and competence into their life. And in the mentee interviews, they were also asked, okay, so you said that you had a positive and high quality relationship with your mentor. Why do you think that was? And their examples show evidence that it was because of a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence. So one mentee said, I was extremely happy in my relationship because I had lots of choices. I had a lot of choices with the song, so a sense of autonomy. Another mentee said she would tell me stuff. She was always kind, friendly, and happy. So again, feeling a sense of connection because the mentor was making personal disclosures, supporting a sense of autonomy. She would tell me stuff. And then finally, another mentee said, I felt good in my relationship because I learned that I could do stuff that I never did before, like the violin. I never knew I could, so now I am happy that I can, and I know I can. So kind of wrapping it all up, the main practical contribution from this study really is the ABC companion. So this could be used by future mentoring programs or just replicate the process and have your own high school mentors go through that skill building session to co-construct their own definitions for autonomy, belonging, and competence, and then their strategies, which they can have kind of in real time during mentoring sessions. In terms of practical lessons learned, we learned some lessons about autonomy, belonging, and competence support. For autonomy support, we learned that we should really try to create more opportunities for shared learning and cooperation. So since in the mentoring sessions 5 through 10, it became more structured. Again, the mentors were tasked with teaching their mentees kind of specific rhythms. They struggled to support autonomy. So in future programs, you might look for more shared learning and cooperation throughout the entire mentoring program. We also might be more transparent about the importance of balancing autonomy with more structured goals. So just because there's more structure in a mentoring relationship or working towards more kind of goal-oriented tasks doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. And there's previous research out there that demonstrates just exactly that. But the really important thing in this context would have been for me to explain to the mentors that it's okay that there's more structure in this relationship and you're having less opportunities to support autonomy because there is more structure. For belonging support, the main lesson is really to encourage the mentors to discuss their mentees' interests at the earliest opportunity. So demonstrating kind of a personal interest in the mentee was a really potent strategy that the mentors found themselves. So in future programs, if you encourage the mentors to do that kind of right from the hop, you might find that there's kind of deeper connections formed right from the outset of the program. In terms of competence support, I already mentioned this, but you might help the mentors provide more effort-focused feedback, which again is supporting a growth mindset. In terms of considerations and future directions, it would be important to kind of increase the sample size and diversity. So this group was all females, so maybe examining more males in the group, maybe that changes how they support autonomy, belonging, and competence, or even how they define it. And obviously, a larger group would be great. There was only 10 in my study. More extensive mentor skill building would be very beneficial. Our study was, the skill building was a bit truncated because we were limited to the time between classes at the after school music program because we didn't want to limit their kind of learning opportunities. So although we met the best practice of 2 hours, more extensive time would have been really helpful. We might collect video recordings of the mentoring session. So audio recordings don't capture everything. So having video recordings of the mentoring sessions might pick up subtleties in facial expressions or body language or gestures, and how that might support or encourage a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence. So, and then additional context. So this was in a musical context. So it'd be really important and useful to examine it in an educational context or an athletic context or a supportive context. And that's it. Thank you. So
Thank you.
Stop sharing.
Thanks, Ben. I think this study is very, very fascinating. And what we're learning from peer mentoring is that it appears to be quite an effective strategy to promote youth positive development and growth and all of that, but that, there are certain conditions that are essential to make that happen, including from that meta-analysis, it shows that, adult supervision and training is particularly important when you're dealing with peer mentors. So I think your program is an interesting way of doing that. So let's open it up to questions. Feel free to put them in the chat if you're not feeling comfortable unmuting your mic, but other than that, I think we can just very informally take questions from the audience. I'm sure people have, even if it's suggestions or comments and not simply questions, that those are also welcome. So let's hear from the crowd. Go ahead, Colleen.
My name's Colleen, and I'm in Pelham, Ontario. I run an intergenerational theater project, so I'm really interested in what you've just talked about. Thank you. In looking at, I already have teens interacting with seniors in our community, and by seniors I mean senior citizens, not senior high school students. But now I'm looking at how I could use those high school students to mentor elementary school students towards involvement in the program. So I'm just wondering, with that sort of 3 level of ages interacting, whether you would make any suggestions for modification to the mentoring.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'd love to learn more about that program. I'm not sure much changes in the sense that I would still keep kind of the core aspects of the ongoing monitoring and support. So you might introduce a mentor support group with the high school students if they are going to be taking on that role as mentors, right? And you also might invite the seniors to participate in those sessions as well with the high school students and say, look, when I was mentoring you, this is what we did, or this is what I would say to you sometimes, and that seemed to really help. You might not invite them every time, but maybe every other time they could come. And that's a really cool opportunity because you're embedding opportunities for ongoing support and learning from the high school students to the high school students. But then you're also inviting that intergenerational relationship to come in, because the seniors are coming in and they're still providing mentoring to the high school students who are then going to use that knowledge to mentor the elementary students. So I'm not sure much would change outside of that. I would just want to ensure that the high school students are prepared to take on that role. So they have the training beforehand and they have those ongoing forms of monitoring and support, I think would be key.
Great. But you would still stick with the three: autonomy, belonging, and competence.
It depends on the purpose of your program and your goals, but from my perspective, it's a kind of easy to understand theory. It's effective, and it's the ABCs of mentoring. It's very kind of approachable and accessible. So yeah, I would if it was my program.
Great. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you.
Oh, so we have something in the chat from Marissa, which is positive feedback and not a question, saying that Marissa coordinates a teen mentoring program between grade 7 and 8 and grade 11 and 12. And now that will be useful to pass to the high school mentors. Neat.
Thanks,
Neat.
Marissa.
I added a link to a quick survey about the webinar in the chat. If you have a chance to provide us with some feedback, that will help us with future webinars and so on. And if I may, since since we don't have any other questions at this time, I think there's something that I found really interesting in the sequencing of your program, starting with a developmental focus and then transitioning to a more instrumental approach, and the challenges that eventually presented when it came to the mentors trying to bolster the mentees' sense of autonomy. Is that something that you might revise going forward? Or would you even consider inversing the order, starting with a more instrumental focus and a more developmental approach at the end? I guess it really depends on your audience, right? Because some programs, particularly working with justice-involved youth, if I'm thinking about Michael Karcher's program in the US, found that for that particular population, it was very good to start with the instrumental support, staying on task, providing very concrete advice, support, and all of that, and then getting into a more developmental relationship, because that's what those young people needed and responded to better. So I don't know if you think that that the sequencing is the right one for this audience, or if you would revise it for if you're implementing it in other contexts, for example.
Yeah, and this is really Jean Rhodes, her Older and Wiser new book, right? It's all about, are mentoring relationships developmental, or are they instrumental, or are they a hybrid? I think I would probably keep the same sequence. I think developing that sense of positive and kind of caring relationship is really critical to have that core foundation before you start working on kind of goal-oriented things. And that's just my personal belief. I found that works in my own mentoring relationship with a mentee. So I would probably keep that same structure. The thing I would change was I would be a lot more transparent with both the mentors and the mentees about the structure of the last 5 mentoring sessions. I would sit everyone down and say, there's going to be more structure and kind of a goal-oriented, task-oriented nature of our relationship, and that's okay. And this is why we're doing it. So it's kind of to increase the transparency and let the mentors and the mentees know it's not your fault. Your mentor isn't doing this just because they need you to work on this. It's because whoever's running the program wants this goal to kind of be achieved or things of that nature. So I would just increase the transparency is how I would have approached it. Yeah.
Hi, sorry. So I'm just curious about what made you go towards me. You can see the piano in my background. I have a music teaching background. So just curious about why you chose instruments and also thinking of a broader, you don't have to answer this part, but how, I mean, as music teachers, we always joked about how we were mentors first and music teachers second. And, you know, you develop a relationship with a child for X amount of years. And, you know, sometimes the whole music lesson was mentoring rather than playing the instrument, depending on what they needed. So just how you might kind of bring that to the music community.
Yeah. Well, we chose instrument instruction because basically it was just convenient. That was the time slot that was open, but it could have easily been choir or any other kind of genre of music. And we had the instruments, and the mentees were also super interested in learning the violin. It was their first time picking up a violin or the cello or the guitar, things of that nature. And I forget the second part of your question, sorry.
Oh, sorry, just if there was a goal. I know you talk about choosing different areas to kind of expand the research, but if you were thinking about at all bringing this to music teachers, just to kind of give them more guidance on the mentoring aspect of, which, you know, maybe families who pay for the lessons might not agree with, but as teachers, I think it would be beneficial to learn more, like those three things you spoke to, bringing that to their lesson.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that would be really interesting to scale it to adults. And the way I would do that is I've done a lot of research in schools and in kind of formal education schools. And I found that teachers don't have a lot of opportunities to see how their colleagues are teaching. And I think that's a real kind of missed opportunity because you can really get a sense of some of the strategies that work well and don't work well. So to scale it to kind of music teachers, if you're not in the same building, I think I would try to replicate those mentor support meetings kind of in an online forum or something like that, where music teachers visit frequently, where you could kind of report out on strategies that you're using and are working, and then use that in your own mentoring sessions. If you are in the same building, just get together for lunch every 2 weeks and discuss the strategies that you're using. Or, you know, before you get to that, create your own strategies together, right? Create your own ABC companion that you can go out and use and see what works and what doesn't work. So that would be my suggestion. Yeah.
We have a question from Brendan, and then there's something in the chat. So let's start with Brendan's comment or question.
Sure.
Hey, Ben, I'm just wondering about a little bit more about the process of moving from co-constructing the definitions for autonomy, belonging, and competence, and then moving that to the actual prompts that you, I believe, co-created with the kids in the ABC companion. Like, what did that process look like? How much involvement did the kids have, and were they able to distinguish you know, the prompts that they were suggesting under each one of those headings themselves, or was there a lot of support in that process and kind of deciding where that would exist?
Yeah, that's a great point. In the paper, it outlines kind of which strategies and statements were created by the youth and which ones were created by me. I can't recall offhand, but it was something like 75% was done by them. The majority was done by them. And I was pretty shocked and surprised at how well they were able to engage in this. So after they did their definitions and then they went into those role-playing scenarios, we basically we had everything that they said and did, right? So it was easy to map that on from each role-playing scenario to the ABC companion because they were already compartmentalized into autonomy, belonging, and competence. So once they had all of those kind of brainstormed there, we just basically went around and picked our favorites and then wrote it immediately onto a rough draft of the ABC companion, right? So it was just that quick transfer. So I don't know if that answers your question, but in general, they were, I don't know if it was just a good group of kids, but they were really amazing at doing this work. It was surprising. Yeah. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising, but yeah.
We have a comment from Sherry Ann asking about the length of the mentoring relationship. Do you feel like a longer mentoring relationship would lead to a greater impact, or does it really matter as long as there is a more time-bound structure with set goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my preference, they would have been longer. You know, research does support the idea that 12 months or more is most effective, but there's also evidence out there that more intensive kind of short-term programs can produce benefits as well if they are kind of more focused on goals and tasks. This was a bit of a unique program because this was our first time piloting it, and at the end of the program, the mentors kind of phased out of the after-school program, so there weren't opportunities for those relationships to develop. But I think looking back, if we wanted to make them more kind of enduring, we would have used maybe students in like the third year of their program so that they could do it kind of for 2 years. But yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely recommend more time.
Something is weird with the chat in Zoom today. I'm not able to attach files, but I did include a link to the article that you published
Thanks.
in 2021 on this project here. I don't know if you did that in your analysis, but did you notice an evolution of the relationship quality over the period of time that the program had? I know you presented the average and all of that, so I don't know if you were tracking it session by session.
Yeah, we didn't do an analysis on the session by session. We kind of just looked at the average for each, but that would be really interesting. And I might go back to it now that we've discussed kind of the developmental focus. What are the relationship qualities at the end of that? And then kind of how they progress into the instrumental. That would be a really interesting analysis to do, but unfortunately we didn't do it for this paper.
Good. I think we're nearing the end of our time. And I know, Ben, you're very kind to take time out of your work today to come and present your findings with the audience here. Really, really appreciate it. I think there's a lot of potential in cross-age peer mentoring in terms of a scalable approach to get more mentoring to young people across the country. So thank you for sharing your findings. It's quite fascinating, and I'm sure we will hear from you in the next couple of years too. Your PhD research is particularly interesting as well. So there's an open invitation for you to come and share whenever you have anything to share. And I want to thank everyone who participated today. The recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well as the slides. And don't pay money to academic publishers to get the article, because the money doesn't go to Ben or anyone. So if you want it, email Ben or me, and I think we'll share the PDF with you if you're interested in reading the research article. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Ben.
Thank you.